Hello and welcome. Jason is a Norwegian artist, currently living in France, who is not as widely known in North America as he should be. His list of credits is rather extensive, but only a select amount of work has been published in English by Fantagraphics. Of equal difficulty is finding information about the artist. Like his work, interviews and details about his life are sparse. The majority of his interviews and such are in Norwegian and French. Luckily, there's Google Translate, but that can be flawed at times. So the forthcoming background detail might be a touch inaccurate, but I did my best. Jason was originally inspired by another single-name artist, Erie, a Belgian creator who produced numerous adventures with the protagonist, Tintin. In fact, choosing a single name to sign his work was also inspired by Erie. I've read the initials of his actual name were used to create his pen name, although, other than what's pretty obvious through observation, I couldn't officially confirm this detail. According to Jason, he moved from Norway to France in order to create traditional 48 or 64-page comic book albums, similar to Tintin, Asterix, and other modern European creators like Jodorowsky, Moebius, and Enki Bilal. He also knew that he would only achieve limited success if he continued to publish exclusively in Norway. In order to actually make a living, he had to move to France and break into the French market, which was far more robust and supportive. Since the 90s, that's exactly what Jason has done. He's continually produced comic work that is, nowadays, usually published concurrently in Norway, France, and North America. The only work he did for a mainstream audience was an amusing 4-page story in Marvel's Strange Tales #1 from 2009. In it, Spider-Man has a standard fight with Dr. Octopus, but the fight is making him thirsty. So he suggests they go for a beer and unwind. Dr. Octopus agrees. At the bar, Spider-Man pours his beer over the doctor's head, and the doctor punches him in the face, giving him a black eye. It ends with Peter Parker lying about his black eye to Flash Thompson, and Dr. Octopus is in therapy, bummed out that Spider-Man was a jerk to him. That gives one a pretty good taste of Jason's work in general. It's quite unique and distinct. Both Jason's art and writing can be characterized as minimalist. It's storytelling burned down to its core elements. Yet, within each story, there is some amazing character development. Furthermore, despite the plot moving forward at a rapid pace, it is surprisingly detailed without being convoluted. Due to the anthropomorphic characters, which is his signature style choice, it looks somewhat surreal, but the actual story is very grounded, even if it contains some absurdist elements. The balance achieved is nothing short of masterful. It's amazing that so much is accomplished with so little detail. Let's put it this way, economy is a pretty noticeable theme with Jason. I Killed Adolf Hitler is an unusual time travel story. The protagonist is a hired assassin who takes jobs murdering anyone. This is punctuated by a series of people hiring him to get rid of other people. So assassination seems pretty normalized in this society. One client hires him to go back in time and kill Adolf Hitler. In fact, the client has built a time machine so the protagonist can carry out this job. The one catch is the time machine takes 50 years to power up. One trip back and then one trip forward is all the machine can handle. After that, it needs to be recharged. The protagonist hops back in time and fails. Hitler hops into the time machine and goes to the future. The protagonist, now 50 years older, suddenly appears and shoots Hitler. However, Hitler survives, and he escapes to live out his life in modern times. The majority of the remaining story is the protagonist and a partner trying to locate Hitler and finish the task. There's a pretty good twist that I won't spoil for you. What's brilliant is how the context of the beginning changes once one gets to the end. There's a logical simplicity that one accepts but doesn't understand until the end arrives. Again, I can't be specific or it ruins the story. Unlike some time travel stories, Looper comes to mind. It doesn't try to be overly clever and fool the audience. Nor is it an infinitely detailed look at time paradoxes like the movie Primer. I Killed Adolf Hitler is stupidly straightforward in the best possible way, but also very clever. Every plot detail is wrapped up, and there's no lingering questions in one's mind. It is that complete. The Left Bank Gang is a good example of Jason using well-known, actual people to tell a story. The story is centered around Ernest Hemingway living in France. He regularly meets with his fellow expatriates, F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, James Joyce, and Ezra Pound. Gertrude Stein also makes an appearance. They are all broke cartoonists trying to make a living. One day, Hemingway has the idea to rob a bank, and he enlists his friends to help him. Suddenly, the comic becomes a film noir caper told in a Rashomon style. We see the bank job and the aftermath happen from different perspectives, all of which adds a little extra detail to the fractured story. Each character fills in a piece of what actually occurred and why. There are unexpected twists and a double-cross or two, and it lands on a suitably tragic conclusion. What's interesting is how Jason doesn't stray from the popular depictions of the authors. Hemingway is like Jason himself. His cartooning is terse and economical. Fitzgerald is hounded by his wife and only cartoons to support his lifestyle. Joyce is occasionally poetic and oblique. Yet somehow, none of them come off as undeveloped stereotypes. The Werewolves of Montpellier is best summed up as a quirky, slice-of-life drama. It's focused around the burglar, Sven. A few times a month, he puts on a werewolf mask, scrambles across the rooftops, and steals from people. One evening, someone captures a picture of him in the act. This publicity brings him to the attention of actual werewolves, who don't approve of this activity. That's where the story begins. However, the majority of it looks at Sven and his involvement with his neighbor, Audrey. The complication is, Sven finds himself attracted to Audrey despite the fact that she's a lesbian. So while they may be close and do a lot of things together, their relationship isn't going to develop beyond a certain stage. Overall, Werewolves has a 21st century, unrequited love angle to it. As an example of understating a plot beat, Sven's date makes an observation that Sven has to agree with. In a mere 8 panels, we see a date going well, to a brief epiphany, to the date being over. All that needs to be said is said, and the natural conclusion to the evening isn't drawn out for dramatic effect, because the point of that scene isn't to have an argument. It's to point out that Sven is in love with Audrey, and he knows their friendship might not survive his attraction. In the end, that's what the story is trying to resolve. This wouldn't be the first Jason book I'd suggest to a new reader, but I would suggest it for fans of Love and Rockets type of stories, or for people like myself who find it interesting to read different kinds of stories from certain creators. Isle of 100,000 Corpses is an adventure story that follows Gwenny, a girl living with her abusive mother who wants to learn the fate of her father. She believes he was abducted and taken to a faraway, nefarious island. Gwenny hires a pirate ship to take her to this island and discover whether her father is living or dead. She blackmails a pirate to ensure her safety and to protect her while they explore the dangerous island. As it turns out, the island is a school for children learning the trade of torture and capital punishment. People are lured to the island as unwilling test subjects so the children can practice various techniques. Mayhem breaks out as Gwenny investigates the school and learns of her father's fate. This tale, which was a collaboration with the writer Fabian Vellman, is a high-action adventure story. Its pace is relentless, and it never slows down. The involvement of the inept apprentice at one point is the only plot beat that feels slightly forced, but not so much that it breaks the story. It's kind of necessary, so it's easy to overlook it. Otherwise, it's packed with action, and a few twists that keep it from getting anywhere near stale. Low Moon is a short story collection that highlights the variety in Jason's work. It begins with Emily Says Hello, which may be Jason's most enigmatic and haunting tale. It involves an unnamed man and woman who meet a number of times. With each visit, the man brings evidence to prove he's eliminated some other man. In return, she provides certain adult favors. These favors escalate from groping to more intimate activities. When the man leaves, the woman pins a photograph to her wall, drawing an X through the corpse's face. This happens a number of times, with barely any conversation between the man and the woman. When there is a discussion, she is very detached and to the point. Everything is very ritualistic. The story ends on a very important question: who is Emily? It's a question that goes unanswered, and the reader is left wondering whether this was a woman getting revenge for herself or for someone else. or for that matter, whether she was a convincing psychopath that lured a lonely man into doing her bidding and the crimes served no purpose. Either way, it's something that lingers and stays with you for a significant time. The titular story, Low Moon, is the highlight of the collection. It's a Western story with all the stereotypical elements twisted into something absurd. After a time in prison, a bad guy arrives in town with a grudge to settle with the sheriff. The sheriff is a drunk who once had a thing for a lady of the evening, but now has a relationship with a school teacher. The town is uneasy, waiting for the sheriff and the bad guy to face off and settle matters once and for all. The plot sounds like a standard Western story, but the showdown is a chess game. The saloon doesn't serve alcohol, it only serves fancy coffee drinks. Even then, there's still a standard barroom rumble. There's a standard training montage to get the sheriff in fighting shape, and the mentor dies during training, giving the sheriff further inspiration. It's all played straight, but it's completely ridiculous. Ampersand is next, and it's two unrelated stories occurring at the same time. It's solid, but a bit goofy, and it lands exactly where you expect it to. The final story is proto-film noir. It is, as the title suggests, an oddball take on film noir with people who dress like they're in the Flintstones. As with a few of Jason's stories, repetition is used to highlight the bizarre, inexplicable circumstances. In this case, it's a husband that keeps returning from the dead, with no memory that he was killed and buried the day before. The two people who continually commit this crime go to some fairly wild extremes, such as eating the husband to prevent him from returning. This is a surreal look at noir elements. It does include the standard downbeat ending, where the man is blamed for the crime and the femme fatale escapes to live her life. It's amusing more than it is dark, but it's some pretty twisted humor. The Living and the Dead is a love story set within a zombie apocalypse, told as a silent film. Think of it as George A. Romero's first zombie movie, but shot in 1920. While it does have a touching, sweet ending, it is a very, very brief read. Naturally, the majority of the story is told in the artwork, and that makes for a quick pace. Whether intentional or not, the entire graphic novel goes by as fast as one reel in an old-timey movie. After 20 years, the zombie genre is picked rather clean. It's hard to find something fresh or unique. So, The Living and the Dead is going to seem a little been there, done that in comparison. But if you imagine the panels are a bit shaky, with a vignette and a sepia tone filter, while a clunky piano plays in the background, it reads rather pleasantly. What makes Jason's work so effective is not just his various techniques, but how well they integrate with one another and engage the reader. For full-length stories, the plots are reasonably complex, and due to the pared-down nature of the writing and artwork, the pace is exceptionally high. But like with the emotional quality of a scene, that is set by the reader. In many ways, Jason isn't explicitly guiding your perception of time or emotion in any specific direction. It's not that he's being vague. He's allowing the reader to interact subconsciously with the material and project the speed or tone they find satisfying, or for that matter, relevant. These are moments of emptiness, usually punctuated by seemingly blank expressions. These moments don't tell you what to think or feel, but you know exactly what they mean. Put another way, the character's internal life is always implied with a beat of silence. That's some simple but subtle storytelling. Adding to the simplicity is a regular panel arrangement. This ranges from 4 panels to 9 panels on any given page, sometimes more. Regardless, the number of panels is consistent throughout the story and allows for a very organic flow. This repetition is, naturally, strict formalism. The consistent form allows the reader's mind to relax and not be distracted by various shapes and sizes that need interpretation. With that in mind, repetition of plot beats is also consistent in Jason's work. In I Killed Adolf Hitler, the same moment in time is revisited, with a different outcome each time. As a contrast, there's multiple customers wanting someone dead, all having the same result. Additionally, there's the subtle repetition of the relationship between the protagonist and his partner. The most obvious example of repetition is the Left Bank Gang, where the bank job is told over and over from multiple points of view. Again, each character adds something new to the story until the reader has the full picture. In this repeating cycle, something is always added to give the story an extra layer. In The Living and the Dead, the daily actions repeat until the cycle is broken and another story takes over, which may be the most consistent usage of repetition by Jason. It evokes a mundane series of events, repeating on a loop until something happens to take the story elsewhere. In the end, for those unfamiliar with Jason's work, I would suggest starting with I Killed Adolf Hitler first as an introduction to his style of storytelling, or The Left Bank Gang, which is my favorite work by Jason. Isle of 100,000 Graves is also stupidly good fun. These options will give you a taste of what he does and the sublime economy he puts into every story. As mentioned at the beginning, Jason has a fair amount of work available. The stories presented in this video are what I'd suggest for someone unfamiliar with his material. There are plenty more to discover, but these are, in my opinion, some of his best, most accessible pieces. If the mythical algorithm makes this video popular, I would definitely do a follow-up going more in depth into specific works. So do all that engagement stuff. And, as a brief advertisement for myself, head over to Patreon and add your support. All patrons got access to these brief reviews before anyone else. For a new reader, I might not suggest his most current work, Upside Dawn. The majority of that volume is mixing genres or story types to see the results, like putting together James Joyce and Quentin Tarantino, or Franz Kafka and The Prisoner. In one story, a standard date lapses into a Dadaist poem. In my opinion, it's very experimental stuff that isn't indicative of his typical work. Out of curiosity, I'd like to know how many are familiar with Jason's work. What have you read, and what stuck with you when you read it? Or is this video exposing you to something new that you've never seen before? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, or listening, whatever the case may be. Additional thanks to all my fine supporters on Patreon and YouTube. Please show support by subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment. If you'd like to go a step further, there's a link to my Patreon down below. Extra special thanks to Francis De La Cruz, John Nyux, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Denis, Phil Sagan, Corey Drew, Ellis Gregor, Alexa Zernish, Brian Deaton, Johnny Lim, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient.